Today we're going to start Unit 1, Module 3, Lesson 1. This is called the maze. Our purpose here is, in this module, is to introduce you to several different types of game design, several different game mechanics as well, in order to help you build a game. Our final project will be a story-based game. So there'll be some story elements like we had in the previous module, some game elements like we're going to have in this module, and you're going to mash them together. So in this module, we're only going to focus on the game mechanics. We're not going to look at the story part, but that's going to be coming down the line. So, goal here is to build a maze. The way we're going to make that happen is, first we have to make our character move by key presses. I'm combining the character turning and moving in the same action. So when the user presses the right arrow, I'm going to have the character point in a direction that's 90 degrees and move 10 steps. When the character presses the down arrow, I'm going to have them move at 180 degrees and move 10 steps. Left arrow is negative 90. Up arrow is 0. One of the things you have to be careful of is you need to pick where on your character is top, where is bottom, where is left and right. Making your character in such a way that that becomes clear is important. So, when you click the green flag, you want to make sure that your maze character knows where to go to start. We also want to make sure if it's not oriented the proper way that you have it turned to the right direction. Mine, the way I designed it, it was facing up the way I wanted it to be facing. If yours wants to face in a different direction, you can add in a turn here after this, so that way it's facing the correct direction. The other thing I did is I started a forever loop, and I started another forever loop. These two forever loops all exist on the character that's going through the maze. So this is all just on the one character that travels through the maze. And I'm going to check forever to see if it's touching the color blue. If it's touching the color blue, I'm going to have it move backwards 10 steps. This is the purpose for having the character turn. That way I don't have to know what direction the character is facing. I'm just going to have it move backwards from the direction it's facing, because it's always moving forwards. We're not having it move left and right. We're having it turn left and then move forward. So that turning point is important. So that way when we do hit a wall, we just bounce off by 10 blocks. Now, if you don't make your walls thick enough, your character may accidentally jump through the wall. And there's a reason for that. Your characters are built up essentially of a box with a dot in the middle. So your character could be a circle. But your character doesn't actually touch the blue line until the dot crosses the blue line. So your character could be partway into the blue line and not set off the touching sequence. So if your character doesn't move far enough into the blue line, it might actually be able to bounce right through. The other thing you can do is, if you're quick enough, you could get your character through the blue between loops. In other words, you've checked to see if it's touching the color. At the same time, right after it's checked it, you move into the blue and through the blue before it can check to see if you're touching the blue again. It's a very small dot that has to get through that blue section. So you have to make your blue section big enough such that your character can't pass through it if they're moving fast enough. If someone can play the game such that they get the character to go through the wall before it loops back and checks to see if it's touching that blue again, then it's going to magically pass through walls. So you got to be very careful with that. More complicated programming environments deal with that by setting up a clock within the program so that can't happen. That this check happens in sync with every key press. So they can't press a key without that check happening. A little bit more complicated. You could also put the forever loop and build that in so it's checks to see if it's touching blue every time you press a key. And if you're touching blue when you press a key, then it doesn't do anything. And maybe it waits to this to get backwards. The other thing you have to be careful of is getting your character stuck in a loop because your space between blue walls is too small. If I have my character here and it touches the blue wall, and then I have another blue wall back here, and my character moves back 10 spaces and puts it back into a blue wall. So it ends up getting trapped and then essentially jumps itself out of the maze because it keeps moving back 10 spaces. So you have to make sure there's enough room for your character to move backwards 10 spaces no matter what direction they're facing if they hit a blue wall. So there's a lot into the design of this maze. Making sure that it actually works is important. One way to go through that is game testing. Testing every spot along your wall, making sure that the bounces work, making sure that you can't try to get through that wall. That's one of the things we talked about before when you're doing a beta test. You would have your gamers check. They'd go through, and somebody's job would be to go through and try to make the program fail. The other thing I have going on is checking to see if I'm touching some type of other object. I have a ball at the end of my maze, so it's a little puppy running through a maze looking for a ball. So the puppy's the character, the person's the character. I forget which one it was. But to check to see if the ball is touching this object, and if it does, then I say you win. Something that tells me when it's the end of the maze. The important thing is Scratch can determine whether it's touching a color. It can also determine if it's touching an object. And all of these events are happening at the same time, simultaneously. It's always checking to see if it's touching blue. It's always checking to see if it's touching that ending mark, which means there's going to be some time gaps. Because a computer can't do that. It can't constantly be checking because it has to take time to check. Yes, it happens very fast. But the more things that you ask it to do simultaneously, the slower it gets. And you build in bugs into your computer program. So you have to be careful of that, making sure you're not outpacing this and making sure that the computer can actually keep up with what you're asking it to do. If you have a very slow computer, because again, this doesn't have a game clock, it doesn't have a built-in timer, you could actually make this maze totally fail because the computer's slow. The movement of the character is faster than the game check and the loop, so then the character can magically pass through walls all the time. So the speed of the computer could really affect this. This is a real problem for game designers. The speed of the computer being too slow and messing up their game checks. It's not checking frequently enough. There is a fix for it, but it doesn't exist in Scratch. It exists in Unity, but it doesn't exist in Scratch. We're also going to set a score. Now you could decide how you want to do the score. Maybe the score is based upon you get some starting value, and every time they touch a wall, they lose points. Or maybe their points go up every time they move a certain distance without touching a wall. Or maybe it's set off with some type of clock. You have a clock running, and they get points just for moving through the maze. You can decide how you do it, but either way, we're going to use a variable. You're going to call it score. You're going to set it to 0 in the beginning. You're going to choose how much you change it by. whatever the event that causes the score to go up, whether it's a clock just going on or if they hit a wall and you're going to subtract points. So you need some type of event to control how the score is changed. You can choose whether or not the variable is shown or hidden. So if you show the variable will show up in the display box and the user will be able to see the score. If you want to format it in a different way and show the score in a fancier box or some other method, you can do that. You would have to hide this variable then and take the data from the variable and put it into something else to show the user. I think it's easier just to show it for now. But later, as you guys get into more advanced game design, you might want to kind of format what that score looks like. Or maybe you don't want the person to see the score until the very end. You have to decide how you want that score to be handled. So this is kind of how the whole thing works. I set the score to 0 in the beginning. I have it pointing in the right direction. I move it to a certain spot. And I get my backdrop to backdrop 1. The reason I'm affecting the backdrop is because I have different levels built into this. Each level of the maze is a different backdrop. The backdrops are the blue part of the maze that's drawn. So all I did is went into the vectors and drew a whole bunch of blue on the screen. And that was my map. And I'll open up Scratch so you can see that. Then I have my loop here that's just doing a forever loop. And I'm checking to see if I'm touching the blue. I'm also checking to see if I'm touching the edge. And I'm checking to see if I'm touching the puppy. There's a slight problem with this in the timing. Because I check this, then I check this, then I check this, then I go back up to the top. So I'm putting in a delay. Possibly better code would have been to do 3 separate events. So that way it's always just checking all of them all at once. So that could be a good thing to look at, it splitting that out. But I was kind of lazy and did it all as one. Then I have my key arrow presses that we talked about before. And I have a broadcast. When I receive next level, move back to the beginning. So when this person touches the puppy, when the sphere sprite touches the puppy, I broadcast that I'm ready to go to the next level. I change the score, increase it by 1. They only get 1 point for going to each level. And then I switch the level, which is going to involve changing the backdrop and pointing in the correct direction. Do I forget to switch the backdrop? Oh yeah, here we go. It's on the stage. When I receive next level, switch to the next backdrop. So this is all this code is on the sprite. Then I just have this one little bit of code here on the stage. The stage itself switches its backdrop. And then I have my score up here. So let's kind of see how this works. So in Lesson 1, Maze, there is some starter code. I don't want you remixing it. I want you starting from scratch, but this is how the game looks like. You can see I have my little character here. It's just a sprite that's been edited, so I can see which direction is which. I move my character forward and backwards. If I touch the wall, whoops. Oh, I have it so he goes back to the beginning. Touch the wall, it bounces backwards. If he touches the edge, I think he goes back to the beginning. Yeah. If he walks off the screen, he goes back to the beginning. So you don't want to walk off the screen in my character. Notice, though, this is actually a glitch now. Watch what happens. He walks into the wall, but then goes back to the beginning. Why did that happen? Well, he bounced off the blue backwards 10 steps and then touched the edge, which sent him back to the beginning. So if I haven't bounced off the blue and moved backwards 10 steps and then bounce off the edge and move backwards 10 steps, that's going to end off just sending him off into space and the character will disappear. So that's why he moves back to the beginning, so it doesn't end up making the character kind of just bouncing off into space without ever finishing the game. So that would be, I think that was probably a bug I had found and I fixed it. Notice my score is going down. Down to -10 already. The score box does not interfere with movement. I'm going to move down and now watch what happens when he touches the puppy. It switches. And now I have a new background. Okay? Make the maze more complicated, but all that happened was the background switched. All the functionality is the same. There is no difference in the way the code works. All the functionality is exactly the same. Oops. I touched the blue wall and went through the edge. Okay. Let's take a look inside. You can see I have all my code. I have a stop, so that way I know what level I'm on. This stops the loop once I get to level 3. Once it stops, then I kind of hide the character, so that way that disappears. When I switch to backdrop 4, that's the winning backdrop screen, I have the puppy disappear. When the green flag is clicked, I make sure he gets shown. So there's a couple, little features that I added. So I'll know you've remixed it if I see all that stuff in there. If your maze looks exactly like mine and all you do is change the maze and all the code's the same, it's not going to make much sense. You should be doing your own variables, picking your own thing. I don't want you just copying code here. I want you to actually really try to create this from scratch. That's the only way you're going to really learn how to do it, is to really go ahead and just create it. Feel free to use this as a model, but don't copy the code. This is the same maze, but this one's got some issues with it. If you're having issues with yours, you might want to take a look at this. This might help you figure out some of the problems. The orange ball shouldn't be able to go through walls. A new level should appear when the orange ball reaches the green goal. You can kind of look at their code. This is a simpler version than mine, but it also has those mistakes in it. So you'd have to go through, and when you did yours, you have to make sure that you fix those mistakes. Here's the game studio for it. You can submit your game studio. And finally, you're going to submit your maze fix and the maze remix. So I want you to remix the broken maze and fix it first. Then I want you to create your own maze and submit that here as well. So there should be 2 links in this assignment. One for the fixed broken maze, remixed. One is your new maze, which is not a remix of mine. It's your own maze. You can start with this remix if you would like in order to build your maze. But in order to start with this, you have to make sure you fix it first. So that's okay if you fix it and then this becomes your final project and that's what you submit, that's okay. Or if you want to do something totally separate, give me 2 links. One where this is fixed and then your own maze. So the other option is to fix this and then just use this as your starting point. At that point, you'd only give me 1 link, which would be to the fixed version of the broken maze, and then added to it would be all of your stuff that you've added to it. Different backdrops, changing the different levels, making sure the dynamics so it doesn't walk through walls is fixed, make sure it deals with bouncing off edges, all those different ideas. So you'll submit that into there, and that'll be it.